Terry McCosker co-founded RCS Australia 35 years ago, and it set the benchmark since for capacity building in rural and regional Australia. He is responsible for the introduction of holistic thinking and managing to Australia in 1989, 30 years ago. The RCS flagship is called Grazing for Profit. It has over 7,000 graduates now and has changed grazing, livestock and business management nationally. Terry's been a leader in rural extension methods, soil carbon research and measurement, and was awarded the degree of Honorary Doctor of Agribusiness by CQU in 2015 in recognition of a 50-year career in research, extension and property management. So Terry's really just the person to bring us greater understanding of why some farmers are more successful than others in changing land management practices. Please give him a warm hand.
Thank you. Good. Thank you for the invitation, and it's fantastic to see so many people here, and I know that some of you have actually experienced a little bit of the work that we do. And Minister, I've got to say to you that you're a shining light in Australia. If we had more agricultural ministers that understood regenerative ag, we will be in a different place a lot faster nationally. 40 years ago, I jumped the fence. I started out in the Queensland Department of Primary Industries as both an extension officer and doing research. And then I got a job in the Northern Territory on an 800,000 acre property, and my job description was somebody who knew something about growing grass. And I got that job after a 3-day interview. I rejected the job initially because I told them I didn't know anything. And as it turned out, that was actually correct. And what they said to me, though, something I've never ever forgotten, and they said, we want somebody who has no preconceived ideas. And you wouldn't believe how that paid off in that particular job. But the epiphany I had was that I'd gone from one side of the fence and I was this so-called expert that knew something about growing grass. And I very quickly learned that I knew absolutely nothing about the business in which I had to grow grass. And everything that I'd known was essentially out of context and did not fit the business that I went into. And it took me 6 months to work out that I needed to go 180 degrees away from everything I thought I knew and go back to first principles and start again. And fortunately, I had the backing of a company who backed up their words to say, we want somebody who has no preconceived ideas, because I turned their ideas on their head. And so I decided 40 odd years ago to develop a private extension service, because I felt that back then the extension model that I grew up on was what I call the expert idiot model, where you have the experts that come along and tell you how to do stuff, and because you're not smart enough to know. But it's great to see that extension and the way we do that is actually changing. And in my experience, I've found that there's a couple of reasons why people change. And the biggest reason for change is to move away from something that's very, very uncomfortable. And there's many, many reasons. It's financial, it can be relationships, unhappiness, family conflict, all of those things. And most of you in this room who are producers or any other businesses, or even if you're alive, you will probably have experienced some of these things. And our first tendency is to want to move away from that. It's like, if it's too hot in the kitchen, get out of it sort of thing. But we don't necessarily have anything to go to. And that, to me, is one of the major problems. But it's these big events, trigger events that happen in our lives that actually bring about change. One of the biggest changes in the wheat industry moving into zero till, etc., was actually due to low wheat prices. And when we find in any industry, when you get a major issue, a major thing happen, that's when you can start to bring about change. But to me, the best way to approach change is the second reason why we need to change, and that is work out what we need to go towards rather than recognise what it is we're moving away from. And I think the ABARE data says that something like 65% of Australian farmers have written goals. And my experience is that somewhere around about 34% of the others are liars. And so there's, or most rather, about 64% rather, didn't actually tell the real truth when they wrote down that they had written goals. It's something that's missing from a lot of lives, and not just the goals, but the vision, the purpose, the why in life is, for so many people, what we need to identify. And I think that's the thing that's driving the Regen Ag movement globally, is that many people are waking up and starting to work out their why. And it's that understanding that's going to move us forwards. But unfortunately, the majority of us need to hit the wall or need to hit the chaos before we're prepared to start to consider some alternative. So, you know, Charlie talked about wet nappies earlier on, and if you ask the question, who wants to change? Everyone, wants change rather. Everyone wants change. But then if you change the question to who wants to change, the hands go down very quickly. But it's all of us that actually have to change. So how do we make that shift, and how do we change the way in which we bring about change in agriculture? And it's not just agriculture, as I'll talk about later. And I look at it in two parts. We've got a head and we've got a heart. And you will find when you talk about and talk to people in regenerative agriculture that the shift is coming from the heart. And if you look at long term, the way we have tried to make change in the past, and maybe still the way we're trying to make change, is we want to teach somebody how to do something different. And I think it's the wrong approach. We've got to start with the why. And the why do we actually need to change and reach the heart level with that why. And then we've got to bust paradigms. But until your heart's open, until your why becomes clear, it's very hard to move forward with different paradigms. And once we've made a paradigm shift and we're doing it from the heart level, then we are able to make an emotional shift. And one of the reasons why most of us get stuck where we are, and I'm no different from anybody else, is that it's to do with our emotions. Often it's fear. And I know that one of the biggest fears in going into regen agriculture is this, what I call the valley of death, which means how do you get from one side to the other side of this valley without dying or killing your business in the process? And that's actually where we really need some work done. We really need some answers to that question. And interestingly, I was talking to some investors recently about investing in Regen Ag, and they said, why would we do that? We can make just as much money out of doing anything else. Where's the evidence that Regen Ag is actually going to pay off? And not only that, why don't we need you? We can just go down to the supermarket and get whatever we need. And I thought, wow, we have a long way to go. To get emotional shift, we need to develop trust. If we want people to change, then they really need to trust the people who are asking for that change or suggesting it or talking about the why. And developing trust takes time. It doesn't happen instantly. And the other thing that I've noticed is that we need a long-term commitment to this. 3-year funding cycles, 2-year funding cycles, it's absolute rubbish. And I've been in this game now, doing what I'm doing now for 35 years in a private extension service. And I have the privilege now of having trained somewhere about 8 or 10,000 people, and 25% of the people doing my courses at the moment are second generation. And I've taught 9 third generation people in the last couple of years, which means I taught their grandparents, their parents, and now their grandchildren. But how much of that longevity do we actually have in our organisations, and the organisations that are driving change and are in a position to drive change? And what I've found is that the way to bring about change is we've got to learn together. The expert idiot model doesn't work. And in this field, we are all learning, and we have to learn together because there's a heck of a lot to learn. And we've got to learn from Mother Nature. And the framework that we work on is basically there's 4 stages of learning, and there's what's called unconscious incompetence, which means basically we don't know what we don't know. And to move on from there, we've got to put ourselves in a position of discovery. We've got to recognise that there's things that we don't know and we want to know them. And then we move into what's called the beginner's mind, where we are open and ready to receive knowledge, and we start learning. But knowledge by itself, in my experience, does not change a business or change a life. Skills is what changes things at the end of the day. And so often, and particularly in our short-term thinking, we run courses for people and expect them to go and change without providing the backup support and the skill development that's required to have the confidence and the trust in making change within our businesses. So at this 3rd stage, we've got to offer coaching. We've got to learn together is a fundamental principle of this 3rd stage. And then once we have the skills, we're looking to convert those into intuition, into unconscious knowledge, which you all have about all of the things that you do every day. But the beauty of this model is it becomes cyclical. You take new knowledge and new skills and you convert them into unconscious competencies, and then you pick up new stuff that you need to learn, and back you go again. And the great thing that I've seen is when people get on this learning cycle, they stay on it and keep learning and developing and sharing, most importantly of all. And does it work? Well, our experience is, with averaged over 11 years with $1.5 billion worth of assets measured, the difference between starting out from a knowledge base and changing and getting to where you have a skill base is about a 3% difference in return on capital. And on that $1.5 billion asset base, that's $50 million a year increase in net profit. There's this perception in places that Regen Ag, you have to go broke to do it. Well, it's not that about it. Regen Ag means regenerating everything. The human, the landscape, the business, every part of it, and production systems. But in the beginning, there's a lot of effort for not a lot of return. So you get low performance initially for a lot of effort, but it takes time, and it's years. It's 3 or 4 years before you start to see the return for the effort that you need to put in to make this sort of change. And a few key elements that I've found over time is that number one is mum is absolutely critical. It's the women in agriculture are the ones who are going to assist in this change. I would say that 70 to 80% of the guys that come and do my courses are taken there kicking and screaming. I had a guy recently, he was promised a fishing trip if he came along to a course, all right? And that's still the way it is, but when we're selling our messages, we really need to focus on the women. In my experience, it's the women in the business that know about all the stuff that Charlie talked about this morning. They know what's going wrong. The blokes can get out there and bury their head in the sand by working all day out in the paddock, and then you can be really tough by coming back and being dirty and tired at the end of every day and not having to deal with the real issues. So peer pressure is one of the biggest things that works against progress. Because we're a mob mentality, We're basically a pack animal. And if you step outside the pack, and if you're the only person in your district that's going to be doing something that's very different, and therefore you're an idiot to everyone else, you have to have the strength of your convictions to be able to stay outside that pack, because the pack will want to pull you back in, and your nature will want you to go back in, because you'll feel more comfortable back in that pack. And I think we need to understand that, particularly at a policy level, because conformity is easier than difference. And we are now talking about difference. We're talking about changing the way we do stuff fundamentally, 180 degrees away from the way we've done a lot of stuff. And I understand there's been some really useful information on Twitter and social media recently about this conference. Just ignore it, right? Do not focus on the people that are trying to take you in the wrong direction. There's a fundamental principle of life, and that is focus on what you want, not on what you don't want. Don't get involved in those debates. And this is going to take a generation. Do not think that this change is going to happen in a hurry. It will take at least a generation. But the great thing I'm seeing is that the baby boomers are now doing succession. And the baby boomers are doing it much better than the previous generation. And most of the people that I work with today are less than 45. And that's a fantastic thing to see coming through our rural industries. But I want to say that my message is not just about agriculture. And this is a message from the universe, a message that I've got several times in the last few months. And that is that every system in human society today is broken. It doesn't matter what you look at: financial, health, law, education, politics, religion, our food system. Every one of those systems is broken. But there is a reorganisation going on, and we are headed for a reset. That at an energetic level, at all sorts of levels in society, we're going to have a reset. But to go through that reset, we're going to go through some fairly difficult times. And at a personal level, I believe that Donald Trump and Boris Johnson have been put there to create the chaos that we need to go through as a society to come out the other end with a different earth. Because, as Charlie said, we have to change something. We have to change it fairly quickly. And to wait a generation for the sort of changes that we need is probably too long for a lot of our systems today. I'll leave you with that message.